Hello, everyone. For this episode, our next guest is Dr. Hina Talib. She is a pediatrician with a subspecialty in adolescent medicine. This was a really fun conversation that spans, a little bit learning about her life, what got her excited about pediatrics. We discuss adolescent medicine. We discuss physician burnout. She also talks about, what brings her energy. And I think it was just a really fun conversation. And with all these, interviews and guests that we have on, I think the great thing is to really listen to what gets them inspired about their work, what allows, these physicians to really be fulfilled and excited about medicine. And Dr. Hina Talib absolutely loves what she does. She also has some social media handles. Her Instagram account is at Teen Health Doc. And her Twitter handle is Dr. Hina Talib. That's DrHinaTalib. So please look into those channels if you love the episode. Without further ado, please take a listen to Dr. Hina Talib. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Happy Doc. This is Dr. Taylor Brana, your host, and I'm really excited to have Hina Talib. She is a pediatrician, a subspecialist in adolescent medicine. And, we got to chat on Facebook a little bit before we went into this episode today. And she just does so much. I feel like I'm definitely talking to a super mom right now. And it's just really exciting to have this conversation with you, Hina. So can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be able to have this conversation with you. As you said, my name's Hina Talib. I'm a attending physician at the Children's Hospital at Montefiore, and I have a subspecialty practice in adolescent medicine. I'm very passionate about teen health, teen mental health, teen wellness, and I have a clinical focus in teen GYN. And I grew up in Kansas City, and I've lived in New York for a very, very, very long time. I guess longer than I ever grew up in Kansas City for. Kansas City is still home, but New York is where I am.
Amazing. And, Kansas to New York, I feel like that's such a big difference in terms of, Kansas to me, it's a little more slower. It's slower. It's a little bit more rural. And then you go to the big city, huh?
Yeah. And it's funny. I have toddlers right now, and they sort of only know, they think that airports really exist to take you to Kansas City. And so it's really fun because that's where they think, that's what adventure travel to them is, to have that rural experience. And we go hang out on little farmsteads and have more nature time than we do in New York. But the balance is really nice. There's a lot of wonderful things about New York that Kansas doesn't have either.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I feel like every time I'm over in New York, I feel like, there's so much there. You can never stop finding new things. There's always, and I feel like whenever I go there, you go to different stores and different places, and everything has a completely different vibe and feel. And it's just a world that keeps on having more worlds, I feel like.
It totally is. It's true what they say. It's a city that never sleeps, and it's always changing and evolving. And now that I have young kids, it's fun to see the city from a different lens. It's fun to see the city from a toddler's eyes and explore and get me out there and exploring more of New York in a different way. So that's fun too.
Amazing. So let's hop right into medicine and talk a little bit about your work and what you do. So, pediatrics, everyone goes into medicine for different reasons. Everyone chooses their specialty for different reasons. What was that? What kind of excited you about, medical school and then obviously going into pediatrics?
Oh, so it's a little bit of a sad story. I had a sister when I was young who unfortunately passed away of SMA, which is spinal muscular atrophy. And I think I was 7 and she was 3 when she passed. And I sort of remembered and was kind of present and the experience of watching her go through life in and out of hospitals and spending her birthdays in ICU settings. And it was very impactful. I was made very close relationships with her care team, her nurses, her therapists at home. And I think from a very young age, I knew that I wanted to be part of the world that were helpers and that were just so kind and generous in that early time in my life. And then I was also very much, I guess, inspired by my own mother, who is a general pediatrician herself. She actually still practices in Kansas City and has been a practicing academic general pediatrician for like 40 years. And so I always had her as a role model, as somebody who really enjoyed her career and had a wonderful, meaningful work. And so that was also very inspiring to me. And both of those things led me from a very young age to have an interest in helping kids. And I didn't really solidify that as an interest in medicine until my undergraduate years. And then when I knew about pediatrics probably before I knew about medicine. Like I knew I wanted to work with children before I knew that medicine was the vehicle that I wanted to definitely help children with.
Amazing. And so in that process, right, obviously you had a lot of inspirations, with your sister and with your mother, and it's great to see, you it sounds like you kept an open mind, but it just, you ended up going right into kind of what mom did as well, right?
Yeah. It's funny, because as an adolescent and being an adolescent medicine physician, I definitely went through my years of not wanting to turn into my mother and wanting to do my own thing and be my own person, which is developmentally normal for a teenager to go through. And then it's just kind of funny and ironic that later in life, I am slowly turning into my mother, and I'm totally okay with that now.
Yeah, it's funny, adolescent medicine, right? And it makes me think about the rebellious phase of teenagers. They're like, I don't want to be like mom. Okay.
Yep. And then you get older and things change.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. So obviously, you went into this field, you had a passion, I'm one question I often ask is, did you know when you went on that clinical rotation, did you just know it was going to be pediatrics?
Let's see. I mean, I definitely knew that the subject and the calling, it was there. I wanted to help kids. I wanted to be there for families that were in crisis and were in pain. I thought I was very drawn to that. But then what really clinched it when that first pediatrics rotation were the people that I met, the pediatricians that I met, the residents. They were so happy and they were so welcoming and they were so supportive. And I felt like, oh, these are my people. I just felt like I fit in. And in a way that I didn't feel on other rotations. And so it was even, more than the work that was being done, I just felt very at home with the people that were on that rotation, that were the instructors, the residents, the professors. And that's really what kind of sealed the deal for me.
Yeah. So for you, it was more about that cultural fit. You went to different rotations and it was like, I fit in here. This is my team.
Yeah. I remember that feeling and it's funny, now I'm actually a program director for an adolescent medicine fellowship. So that is people who have done pediatrics, actually, or internal medicine, or family medicine, and they've decided that they want to do another 2 or 3 years of training and be a subspecialist in adolescent medicine. And so I interview a lot of people, and I often get to ask the question of, what made you interested in adolescent medicine? Why are you here? And so I also get to hear a lot of different answers. And it's so funny how many times people say the same thing. I met one adolescent medicine doctor, because there's not very many of us. And so not everybody has met someone and been trained by us, but I met one and we just clicked. We vibed, that one person, they were just so interested in these things that I'm also interested in. And it really made me think, oh, maybe this is where I belong. Because not everybody likes actually taking care of teenagers. And so we often get told, oh, bless you for doing that. And then you think, well, but I really like this. And when you meet other people who also really like it and are inspired and have a calling to work with teenagers, you feel at home too.
That's great. I love that. That was awesome. And so adolescence, right? That's very different. So obviously pediatrics is 0 to 18, sometimes even a little more. And, adolescents, obviously a very specific group. You mentioned it yourself, that it is definitely a group of individuals that can be very tough for parents, very tough for all, even the healthcare system sometimes. So you were drawn to that, right? What, if you could speak to us, what is it about adolescent medicine that you feel like really drew you to specialize in that? And what's the main difference?
I think that with adolescents, as opposed to the younger children, I enjoy the emphasis of speaking and having time alone and having connections with the patients and their families more than when they're younger, and the relationships that you're building are more with the parents. Yeah. And I love that you can have this two-way conversation with an adolescent. I love that you can actually change and help guide them towards healthy behaviors that may impact the rest of their lives. And some of these things are really hard to untrain later in life. And I saw that on my internal medicine and my family medicine rotations where, it was really hard to get somebody to have motivation, to help them have the motivation to make some changes. Whereas an adolescent, it's, some of these behaviors are just starting, or they're just experimentation at this point. And, and so being able to actually affect a change that can be with them for the rest of their lives, and prevent some of these chronic conditions that we see in older adults was really inspiring. And there's a nostalgia in myself and in other people who work in the field of adolescent medicine for those years. We sometimes, we reflect on our own our teen years, and we think about how powerful some of the feelings were and how important it is to be validated and to be heard during those years. And people, if you enjoy listening to those stories of our patients, then it's a good fit for you.
Yeah. That's well said. And I totally, in my work in psychiatry and psychology, again, I don't believe in this, but you could say, are people too far along where they've exhibited certain behaviors or patterns that it's hard to kind of, nip it and stop that from happening, right? Obviously kids, when they're too young, they still don't have the brain hasn't developed enough to really start to understand a lot of these concepts. But these little adults are, able to start to process. And then obviously as a physician, you become a role model to educate them in maybe a way that, they don't have access to, or their parents, aren't aware of. So I think that's a really, powerful statement. And it's fantastic that you get to do that work. Just on the lines of this, is there any specific, stories, obviously no details, but was there ever like a specific moment or story where you really felt like you were able to make an impact?
Oh, that's a good question. I think I feel it every day. I know that sounds, I don't mean for that to sound, arrogant in any way, but I truly feel very honored to be part of somebody who's able to hear the stories that my teens share with me, and they're feeling everything so powerfully and so personally, and they do, some can take some time to develop a rapport, and you might have a few visits before you start to really, they start to open up, and some open up right away because they perceive you as somebody who is there to listen and help. And so I really feel it every day in that connection, in that those candid moments that the teens have. One of the things that we do in adolescent medicine is we have a triad between us, the families, and the patient. And we often we always do ask for alone, confidential time with our teenage patients. And it's a very powerful thing. It requires, trust and rapport with the families to let us have that time. And then the adolescents can also, depending on what, whether they're an early young adolescent, middle, or late, they may have their own sort of like eyebrow raise. Why are you asking my family to leave? But then when you do have that alone time with them and you can kind of ask some questions that might be more sensitive or confidential, or even lighter things that they just feel a little bit more at liberty to share, it's a really special time. And so I feel it every day in my clinical encounters that I am reaching a teen and making a difference.
That's amazing. Again, this is the Happy Doc, and I often, speak about fulfillment. And one of those parts of fulfillment is really finding meaning in your work. And, as I hear you talk about that, it's great to hear that you feel that connection to the meaning of what you do and what you see in the clinic every day.
Yeah. My mom, I remember in residency, I had a really bad, what was it? It was a bad week. I got called out for something on rounds. I don't remember what it was, but I took it personally and I cried. And I remember being in a bathroom crying, and I don't usually cry at work. And it wasn't like a normal thing for me. And I was just really put off. And I think it was maybe, 3/4 of the way through intern year, you're in the slump, you're not feeling good about just a lot of stuff in your life. Because you've been just working. And so I took it very personally. And so I called my mom. And my mom said to me, at the end of the day, it's about the patient. So just go and spend a little more time with your patients and you will feel better about whatever it was that was bothering you, that you were upset about. And I remember thinking, okay, it's my mom, rolling my eyes and just sort of being like, no, I'm tired. I don't want to spend an extra half an hour at the end of an inpatient shift to chit chat with a patient to make me feel better. I want to go watch Gossip Girl. But I did it for a little bit, and I had just a candid, not medical, social almost, I thought, I don't know, end of the day visit with the patient that had been there a long time. And she was so right. The mother opened up in a way that I hadn't seen, it was a lighter conversation. We talked about dinner and what they were going to order. And I said, well, these are the places that, I love to order from. And have you tried them yet? Because they had been there a while. So they'd already tried a couple of the places that were kind of like across the street or within a block distance. And anyway, it did make me feel better. And so I'm glad I listened to my mom. And it's so true. Sometimes if you just focus on the patient encounter, it can bring you back. It's very centering.
Yeah. I mean, and that kind of leads us obviously to the topic of burnout. One of the things that, I hear a lot is your, medicine's not like how it used to be, before, obviously and when your mom worked and all that stuff, everything was paper charts, but also it wasn't about the medical legal part as much. It was more so about the human connection. And now, a lot of physicians are getting obviously burnt out because of the endless amounts of paperwork and the medical legal parts and all of the stuff that patients don't see that get into the way of that process of, just being with the human, right? And, you really spoke to that. What is your experience in terms of, exhaustion and burnout? Like, have you been to those places? And if you have, like, how have you kind of worked with that?
So I think that it's very important for physicians to talk about burnout. I think that increasingly, both on residency levels and student levels, educational leadership are being asked to talk about wellness more. And then as a trend because of that, I think faculty leadership has been thinking about burnout more. In a field like pediatrics. There is an astounding number of young female pediatricians who end up leaving the field, in these like mid-career years after they've been practicing for, 8 to 10 years. And it's a very interesting trend. And I think that attention is now being paid on kind of looking into what the factors are that make somebody who spent so much time, money, effort, training to potentially choose to walk away. That's a big deal. So for me personally, I feel it. I definitely feel the kind of rat race, the time that you have to spend in Epic and how much that's changed over the last 10 years. so much has changed. And I'm sure for people who've been practicing longer, it feels completely different than it did 20, 30 years ago. And so there's very real things that lead to burnout. And, I think that there are also very real things that you can do. Step one, just identifying it.
Yeah.
And then there are also, a lot of things you can do to feel less depersonalized, to feel more valued, and to feel less isolated. And step one, physicians like you talking about it, and in an open forum like this is so important.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that's so true. Even you mentioned the identification phase. I think if you don't even realize you went past E, right? You went past your energy stores and you're now digging into a place where you're hitting exhaustion and you're starting to lose your empathy and you're starting to not really connect. And all of a sudden, like you said, isolation, all those pieces. If you can't even start to notice that, it's very hard to guard yourself and create those boundaries and all of those things that can help you. To ask you this question, what are some ways that you've found that you can, get more energy, find more excitement? We actually touched on this a little bit, earlier before we started recording, but what are some of those things that, bring you back or give you that energy?
Yeah. So, I think that physicians are notoriously terrible at taking care of themselves. And I definitely would raise my hand for that. It's easier to take care of everybody else around us than ourselves. And so things that I have done, recognizing those feelings in myself, recognizing when I'm feeling like I'm not giving 100% to my patients, that's like a red flag that, that something's missing. And so for me, leaning into other roles that I have been, given. So happily, I have an academic position, and I think that is very helpful because it adds variety to my day. And I think variety is the spice of life. And so I like to be able to do all these different things. So having a role where I am a program director and I can mentor and guide fellows in training for adolescent medicine is definitely, being able to lean into that role is definitely helps burnout because I get a lot of gratification out of it. I get recognition for it. And so leaning into roles that are leadership in any way, and that, that's may come from you asking it. It may come from sitting down with your division director or chief or department chair and having them advocate for you and saying, this is something that I think would help me feel a little bit more recognized and give me something to lean into and think about and use my brain in a different way. And then it protects you from having a clinical load that might be a roadblock towards you being able to use your brain in a different way that makes you feel a little bit more fulfilled. And I think that for some people, figuring out ways to do other things in your current job, whether it be admin, teaching, leadership, citizenship within your department, they're, figuring out ways to get the time to be able to do that in a formal way that's supported by your leadership and your supervisors is super important. And that's something I've luckily been able to do. I also now am an inpatient unit director for one of the floors in our children's hospital, the floor that we admit our adolescent medicine patients to. And so that's been another leadership role that's allowed me to be creative and think about things in a different way and adds variety to my days. And then most recently, because you and I are having this conversation, I decided just in November to jump online. And I had heard from other physicians that, hey, this kind of helps with burnout sometimes because you feel instantly connected to all of these other physicians that are not just at your institution, but all over the country and all over the world, really. And I thought that, it sounded a little overwhelming and a little bit much. And as an adolescent medicine physician, I had all these ideas about, why spend more time on social media. It seems to have risks in and of itself that we see for our teenage patients. But I did it. So in November, I joined Twitter. And it was super interesting, super fast-paced, super information-packed. And it was very invigorating. And all of a sudden, I was doing these evening chats with people on different topics that were interesting to me, like med ed and women in medicine. And they would last half an hour, and then I would feel really good afterwards because I had made interesting new online friends, and we connected, and maybe they shared a humanism in medicine piece of art that I thought was really interesting that I could share with other people, or an article, or, about a topic in women in medicine that needed to be amplified and shared, and I got to participate in that. So that was wonderful. And then very recently, like 2 weeks ago, I started my own professional Instagram account. And that has been really fun for me as well, because now I'm getting to use a little bit more of my creativity and my writing skills, which I mean, I've been so siloed in medical writing for so long. And I want to write op-eds, but I haven't had the practice, and I don't I'm not even sure I know how to write creatively anymore. And so I thought, well, Twitter, it's 140 characters, and I'm spending too much time thinking about how to make something fit. Whereas with Instagram, I'm really enjoying the kind of microblog where it's just like 300, 400 words, and I get to get my thoughts out. And I've found that little writing time that I'm making for myself, every other day or so for the last 2 weeks has already been really fun and fulfilling.
No, I mean, you said so much, but, one of the things I was hearing, which I thought was very interesting, is I think a lot of people shy away a lot of times from taking on extra responsibility. But for you, it sounds like you really wanted, you said it, like, variety is a spice of life. And for you, one of the things that really fulfilled you was the ability to, have the director role and have a little bit of the inpatient experience, have some clinical care. And I often hear that too. If your work is often the same thing you're doing every day, it starts to get really mundane. You have to file all this paperwork, and it's not about, having that variety. And now obviously you're adding on social media, and you said Twitter and Instagram. It's just creating different opportunities. And, we're doing this podcast right now, right? And so that's a lot of fun, and it's different too. So you have these different kind of opportunities to do stuff. Something I didn't hear, by the way, was what's the Twitter and the Instagram handle?
Oh, okay, great. Yeah. So the Instagram, which is my current source of fun and inspiration, is at Teen Health Doc.
Okay.
So it's Perfect. Teen Health Doc. Yep. And then, and that's really where I'm spending my time right now. But my Twitter, which has been there for a little while, is at Dr. Hina Talib.
Awesome. And it's Dr. Hina Talib, right?
Yes, correct.
Okay. Awesome. And I want to bring that up too, because, creativity, the ability to express yourself in new sort of avenues is definitely a theme I've heard on this podcast. The ability to, we've spent so much years, and obviously, attendings and everyone, you spend so much years specializing in something, and then not to be able to transform that in a way to really express it and give and provide that information. This route is just so powerful for that. So I want to commend you for, going down that route and trying it out and, seeing what happens.
Yeah. I think impact was something it was on my mind, and it made me think about, when I truly enjoy my clinical time, and I enjoy writing and doing research, but I was thinking about how would it feel to have an impact on a little bit of a larger scale. And I thought, well, instead of leaning in or leaning out of work, let me try leaning online, and let me see if I can have an impact and connect with people who are interested in teen health like I am. So not just medical providers or doctors, but also nurses, social workers, teachers, grandparents, coaches, anybody who is involved in the life of a teenager. There's things that I would love to share with them. And now with this account at Teen Health Doc, I get to connect with them just like that. And it's very exciting.
No, that's great. And it definitely does add another layer of impact. I can, speak to this personally. You just don't know, one post, one message, one moment can definitely, create a positive impact. And obviously with adolescents too, it really does take, especially because, they're kind of impulsive. It really just does take one moment to really maybe, veer someone towards a different direction. So I definitely think that's very powerful. Now there's so much I can speak to you about. We've talked a little bit about, what's gotten you excited about pediatrics? What's kind of gotten you excited about, moving into a space where you can be more creative on social media? I don't feel like we touched on infertility, but I feel like if we went down that route, it would be a whole other podcast. So I almost feel like I need to do a part 2 with you.
I would be thrilled. I feel very passionate about speaking up for physicians who are facing infertility, as I faced it for several years. And so I would be very happy to spend more in-depth time talking about that.
Yeah, I think, I actually almost rarely do this, but I think we're going to have to just have a part 2 to get into some of the fertility work. But I want to leave this space, within the scope of the conversation we've just had. Is there anything you felt like you wanted to touch on, or any message you'd like to leave to our listeners today?
I think that something very powerful is happening in that physicians are starting to recognize and speak up and unite more and feel the collective a little bit more than ever before. And I think social media plays definitely a huge part of that. But, I think that I can feel this return of humanism in medicine. I'm hopeful again in a way that I wasn't when I had my head to the ground and was kind of going through my tracked years. And, I got promoted recently, and that's a really great, awesome thing in academic medicine. And you do all this work to get that to happen. But it's nice to just stop and look around and look up. And I encourage anyone listening to, if you're feeling tracked and if you're feeling like your nose is to the ground, just stop and breathe and look up. And if you're listening to this, then, clearly it's on your mind. But I feel hopeful that things are changing, that we are uniting in a way and focusing on our own self-care and self-importance as physicians in a way that wasn't taught to me in training 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And so I'm hopeful for us.
I love that. I honestly don't think I can say anything else. I think that's the perfect way to stop for today. So I just want to, recap again, Dr. Hina Talib, we spoke about so much in this episode, and there's different channels that you offered today, the Instagram handle at Teen Health Doc, your Twitter, Dr. Hina Talib. And I encourage everyone listening to check out those channels. It was a pleasure to have you on this episode.
Thank you so much for having me. This was my very first podcast, and I am thrilled to be able to have the conversation with you.
Amazing. We did it.
Yay.
All right. And that's the episode for today. I hope you enjoyed this episode with Dr. Hina Talib. And if you love the episode, if you love the Happy Doc, please make sure to subscribe. If you want to really support us, I would love for everyone to take the time to leave a 5-star review on iTunes or whatever channel you use to listen to podcasts. And then if you want to really take that next step, please talk about this podcast with a medical student, a resident, a physician in need. There's also many topics that we hit or discuss that are universal. We talked about burnout, energy, finding fulfillment in our work. And, even if someone isn't in the medical profession, there's always something to learn. So please share this podcast with someone, and I'm sure it's going to uplift their day. Have an amazing day, everyone, and I'll see you on the next episode of The Happy Doc.